All right, so this is going to be the lining materials for the text block. So I'm going to put those lining materials on, and then I'm going to put the end bands on. The end bands, you should have watched that to make the little end band pieces like this that we're then going to trim, but that's the second to last piece that goes on. So the stuff you're going to need for this is we're going to be just gluing the spine here like this, and then we're going to be putting on a strip of mulberry paper, the Japanese paper here. That's going to be exactly the size of the rectangle of the spine like this. Then we're going to be cutting a piece called the flange, and that's going to be about 2.5 inches wide and the height of the kettle stitches. So it's going to fit on there right between the kettle stitches, and then it's going to flap. It's not going to get glued down. It's going to just be attached here. And then we're going to put on the end bands. And then the last piece that goes on is a piece of mohawk. So you just need like a little rectangle of the mohawk. So the first piece that goes on is the mulberry. And that is going to be cut from some of that stuff that I gave you guys. And it's going to be this large. It's going to be the size of the spine on the book. So we want to cut that first before we start gluing anything, because we don't want to have to put down a gluey book and not have our piece ready to be put on there. So I'm going to cut that piece of Japanese paper. And typically what I do is I either measure it right on the book. This is on it commonly and honestly what I do personally all the time is just transfer tick marks. And you've seen me do this in class. So I'm just gonna, and I can see through it. So I'm just kind of making my tick marks on there like that. But another way that you can do that is to use a little scrap piece of paper and measure. I think I've shown this before, walking away to grab a scrap piece. Sorry, I didn't have the piece out. So just a scrap piece of paper like this, and you can fold it around to measure, although I typically just lay it on top, and then I'm putting a mark kind of in the middle of that outer section like that. So that would be my distance, and then I can just transfer that measurement to the piece of Japanese paper. And so I'll just do that because it's really similar in size. The other one might be a little bit wider than what I measured here, but just slightly. So I'll just go ahead and use this. And then you're going to cut that with your ruler or your triangle like this. And then you're just going to cut that to the height. And you can just lay it on there and then just make another little tick mark at the end. And I kind of like to undercut that a little bit so it's not hanging over the top of the book. Just make a little tick mark and then cut that off. Okay, and so that's your first piece of lining. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut my piece of mohawk as well. I just want to make sure that the grain direction is running long on this piece, and I actually think the grain's running like that on that scrap, so I might have to grab a different piece of paper. Oh, this one might be right. No, they're all the opposite grain direction. So the mohawk piece just needs to be, and I think I gave you guys a piece, but if you don't have that, you can always use one of your offcuts that we trimmed out, that piece at the edge. So like, I just tore this off of my little scrap. That little piece that where we cut out originally, you can have, that's the same paper and that's the correct grain direction. It's like this. even though that's still that curled paper, guys. See how much better this got though from being underweight? I mean, it's still sort of there, but it's definitely the right grain direction. It was just rolled up tight for like over a week. So, let me find that little scrap again. What did I do with it? That I measured with? Well, whatever, I'll just do it again. Measure this. Well, I can just use this piece. And I'll just transfer that width. Like that. And I'll use the same end. And then that's going to be my Mohawk strip that goes on last. And it's going to be to the height of the book, which is 5.5. So I'm just kind of cutting that off, knowing that my book is taller. I mean, my strip is taller than that. So then my last piece, just laying it on the book, make a tick mark a little bit inside of it, and then square that up. And that should do it right there. It will be my lining. And then one more piece I've got to cut is the flange. So that's again going to be, so that's the Mohawk, it's a Japanese paper, mulberry paper. And then the flange is also cut from mulberry. So this just needs to be, it just needs to be glued onto the spine and then have like an inch on each side maybe. You know, you can have less. And it's going to be the height of the kettle stitches. So I just need to make my tick mark where that's going to be right inside the kettle stitches. And I can just, because I can see through that paper, I can make that mark. And then it's up here at the head. Even if that's not completely straight, I'm all right with that. And then I just want to make sure I have enough. So I'm just folding it around like an inch on this side and then like an inch on that side. And then I'll just cut that. And I'm not so worried that it's a little bit torn at the top. It's okay. This is a lining piece. And then I've got my other tick mark down here, and I'm going to cut inside of that mark just to be sure it sits inside the kettle stitches. Oops, it tore it a little bit. That's all right. Okay. So now I've got my pieces prepped. That's my flange. This is my Japanese paper lining, and then my mulberry, and then my Mohawk lining. And so now I'm going to just glue this up. So I will use my brush for this part. And I just need to fold up a little cloth so I can dab my brush off. And then I think my glue is going to be off screen, off camera, because I'm trying to zoom in closer so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Because I was noticing, I mean, I've watched or looked back at these videos and thought that's a little bit hard to see. Okay, so my glue, actually that's a little bit far to reach over, so I'll set it here. And I just got some glue on my brush. I made sure the water was off of it. And then I'm gonna really just paint glue, brush glue onto the spine. And you want to make sure that your spine's really flat. And I forgot to do a step that I know, because my book's already flat at the spine. I didn't do this step, but I will show you. I'll just put down a scrap piece of paper and do this. So before you glue, you might want to do this step, which is to, I'm just going to put a piece of paper down because there's glue out here. I want to make sure that this is flat. So I'm going to take the book and turn it spine down. And this, I could just do this on my tabletop if it wasn't gluey, and just kind of pop it down onto the tabletop and make sure that your pages, all the sections are flat against each other, or against the tabletop. And that's just, to do that step is kind of nice. It helps you not have a section that's sticking up, and it'll just be real smooth. So do that step before you glue it. If you did like I did and were gluing it along with me, just put a piece of paper down. Okay, so now that's all gluey. And I made sure that the glue is kind of going between the sections here. And then I can lay my piece of Japanese paper on there. And then I usually take my bone folder and gently push. You don't want to go too crazy with this, because if you start to rub it, it's still wet and it will pull it off. So just gently bone fold it like that. And if it's slid over a little bit, like mine's not perfectly centered on there, but that's okay. And I am trying to make sure that that thread is down and maybe even between the sections, but that's fine like that. And then the next thing you're going to glue on, and you might want to let this dry for 5 minutes before you do the next, especially if you've got a lot of glue. I don't really have a whole lot of glue, so I feel like I can go ahead and do this next step, which is to glue on the flange. So now I'm going to just glue between the kettle stitches, but the same way that I just did, which is to just brush it on flat like that, but only up to each kettle stitch. That's as far as I need to go. And then I'm going to take this flange and lay it centered in that space. So just between the kettle stitches, head and tail, and then just, you know, somewhat evenly across the book. And then again, gently bone fold it down. And you can also take a dry glue brush or a stenciling brush, and you can kind of pounce down. I've got one that I use for this. It's a little stenciling brush, and it's got stiff brush bristles on it because I do this particular thing a lot with this. And you can kind of pounce down and push that Japanese paper down between the sections. This is not a required step. Again, you know, it's just kind of a little bit of a finishing thing to get that Japanese paper to cut the fibers to kind of work down in there. So now this is not glued. So this is a spot where people tend to remember, oh, when we did the cambric on the drum leaf, we glued this down, but we're not going to do that until we're casing the book in. We don't put these flaps of the flange down. We do not glue it. Okay, so now we're going to do the end bands, and we still got this piece of mohawk that's going to go on the very last step, but we're going to make our little end bands for the cap of the head and the tail. So what I want to do is, if you don't have a trimmed end to this, you can take scissors and just kind of cut off that excess band that's sticking out, or cut in just a little bit into the material and just cut that down. So you can see that this is what you're going to see. I don't know if you guys can see that. I don't know if holding it up helps, but you can see the cord in there, and then this is how it's going to go onto the book. It's like that, where that cord is sitting on the very cap of the book. And then that's going to be the width that we cut. The width of the book, the width of the text block is how wide we're going to cut that end band. So like that. Okay, so I lay my end band on there, and then I just make a tick mark right at the width. So that's going to be my first one. I'll just go ahead and do one completely and then do the other one. And you could do this, you know, do both at the same time if you want, but I'm going to just show that. So I cut that to the width. And now I'm just going to miter those corners off so that it won't overhang the book when I'm ready to go on there. And now I'm going to put glue right here. That's the inside of the end band. And it's going to go on like that. So that's where I want to put my glue, is right here. So I can take a brush. This might be a good time for your bottle if you want to just squirt a little dot on there, but I'm just going to use my brush. And this is kind of a big brush for this, but I just want to put some glue on. And I even do want it to kind of go up underneath the end band just a little bit. And then usually I'll try to take my hand and like wipe off the excess glue because I don't want to accidentally get glue out here. But then this is going to get glued on to the edge of the book like that. It kind of just sits on top. So I'm pushing it against the spine here, and then it sits over the top of the book like that. Okay, like that. And then I'll do the other one. So same thing at the other end. You lay that across the top and then make your tick mark for the width. And then trim this. Like that. And then cut your little edges like that. And then glue it. And again, take a second. Now that looks like a lot of glue. I'm going to actually wipe that off. Just take my finger and just get it off. So it's not going to squeeze out and squirt out from under there when I put it on. And then I was just wiping my fingers off on my cloth. And then put that on. Just like the bottom. And that's that. And then the last piece we're going to put on is this piece of mohawk, and it's kind of going to go from head to tail like that. But this time, because I don't want to get this all messy with glue, I'm actually going to glue this strip. So I need a little, I'll cut a little piece of trash paper that I can glue with. And I'm going to just glue that up. Glue out this piece. Get that out of my way. Oops, I got glue on. Oh, there was glue on this side. I didn't realize. Oh, I have to take a second and wipe off my tabletop because I got glue right here. So I'm going to take my cloth and just quickly like that. So if you do start, just pay attention to what you're doing and don't panic. You can always, you have a minute, with your glue. It's not going to instantly dry. And then I'm just going to lay this on the spine of the book. When it goes over the stitches, you can kind of see the thread underneath, which this is perfectly fine because this is going to get cased into the book, or into the case, sorry. And that's a little bit narrow, but that's okay. It's really strengthening the opening of the book so that you can't see through it and it's not an unglued or a non-adhesive binding. I think I wiped a little bit of glue off when I was holding it, so come back and glue that. And then just bump fold it. And now this just needs to dry completely, and then we'll be able to case it in. So the next video I'm going to make is going to be making the case, and that's going to be a longer video because the text block is finished and that just needs to wait now to be cased into the case. So I'm going to make a longer video of just making the case, taking the measurements off of the text block. I will need this because I got to take my measurements to cut my boards, and then we're going to cut boards by hand, and then we're going to make the case. And I'll probably just make a one long video about that. Okay. All right. There you go.